A city that is not designed for women doesn't visibilize the work of care. It presumes the work of care happens somehow, and unless we make it saying this is part of a city, because care is part of a city. Children need to be looked after. Elderly people need to be looked after, right? Hi, I'm Kalpana Vishwanath, and I am the co-founder and CEO of Safety Pin, and you are listening to Understanding the Future podcast.
Hello everyone, I'm Punit Gandhi, Senior Associate with the Climate Center for Cities at the National Institute of Urban Affairs, and welcome to the Season 3 of Understanding the Future podcast. I have been working and studying in the field of sustainability and climate change for more than 8 years, and I have realized that I have a lot of questions on how we can build cities in India that are more climate focused. With Understanding the Future podcast, I interact with experts, entrepreneurs, and government officials to understand what it takes to bring all the different solutions to the ground, as well as how can systemic changes be developed on ground. We will further anchor all the topics being discussed with different skill sets required. This will help us understand the future of cities and future of work in Indian context. If you are tuning in for the first time, do check out our previous episodes. Also, don't forget to check out the Climate Practitioners India Network, a members-led solutions-oriented platform for climate practitioners across India. And join it through the show note. Hope you enjoy the podcast. Hello, and welcome to the Season 3 of Understanding the Future. I'm your host, Punit Gandhi, Senior Associate with the Climate Center for Cities. And today we have with us Kalpana Vishwanath. She is a co-founder of Safety Pin, and today she will help us understand about the safety in cities. Welcome to the show, Kalpana.
Thank you.
Let's start the topic on the lines of first understand what do we mean by safety? What are the different aspects of safety we are looking at? What do we actually mean by it?
That is a very interesting question, because often when as a lay term, and when you look at safety or what is given in the newspaper, it is very often conflated with security. So it's like, do you have CCTV cameras, policing? But when we look at cities, over the years that we've been doing this work around building safer cities, safety is actually a much broader concept, because the lack of safety has very large impact on the lives of people. So, for example, for a woman, if she feels or perceives that a city is unsafe, it often affects her ability to access opportunities in the city. So whether it's to go to work, whether it's maybe to study, maybe whether it's for a young girl to go for tuition classes, enjoy some leisure time in a park. So the impact of the lack of safety is quite wide and vast on the lives of people. So therefore, safety is actually not just about policing. It is not just about CCTV cameras or security, but safety is, to me, a larger concept of a sense of inclusion, accessibility, and it is actually linked to the notion of the right to the city. Because a lack of safety impacts on the ability of a person to exercise her right to the city, to sort of access opportunities for education, employment, livelihood, and eventually impacts her well-being. So I think safety needs to be defined in a much larger concept within the larger, I think, rubric and ambit of what we look at today as inclusive cities. And what we are trying to do is really saying, we don't talk so much only about safe cities, but what we're saying is, what is a gender-friendly city? So you actually, in our case, it may be in another case child-friendly. I mean, there are many sets of people who are often excluded when cities are being planned and designed. So, bringing that diversity to the table, since a lot of our work has been focused on gender inclusion and women and girls' lack of opportunities, that is often the entry point that we've been taking into it. And really, so for me, safety is really gender inclusion, gender friendliness, and accessibility towards enhancing women's right to the city.
Okay. So when we are talking about gender-friendly cities, can you give a more broader context of the same on lines of how each gender would feel more safe and included in the society? And what are we then looking at it from city's perspective? Because I think that will help us create a better base on the lines of our further conversations that will come into picture.
Absolutely. So, when we look at gender, of course, there are not only two genders. Today, there's more and more sort of awareness about the fact that there is a non-binary. But I think a lot of our work till now has focused largely on women's exclusion. And so I'll focus on that, recognizing that there are more issues here. So what is, conventionally, our cities have been designed for and by for a able-bodied male, often a heterosexual male, who goes to office or place of work in the morning and returns in the evening. So we have the concept of a rush hour. We have the way that society is organized around this reality, right? So you off in the morning and expect that, and why is that all the work of care gets taken care of while you may not even be there, and then you come back in the evening and you enjoy whatever there is. Now, when you bring in women's lives, one of the biggest issues we have to factor in is the work of care. Now, the work of care is central to humanity, right? None of us exist without the work of care, but it is invisibilized work. Now, when women start occupying public spaces, when women start engaging in the city, what you're doing is you're visibilizing that part of social life, right? So, if we look at even the notion of the way that women move in a city, they move differently from the way men move. We have this concept of trip chaining. So women may go in the morning, drop the children at school, on the way to work. They may even come back in the afternoon to feed the children, pick up the children, or if they do in the evening, they work and they would go to the market on the way back, pick up groceries, come home. If you look at domestic workers in many of our cities, they come early in the morning, about 5 o'clock, work in several households, right? And then go back home in the afternoon, look after their children, feed their children who come back from school, and then come back in the afternoon, sometimes work till the evening. So the nature of engagement with the city, the nature of engagement with public infrastructure and services, I think we need to mention that. But when we say inclusive or gender friendly, what is it that we want? What needs to be gender friendly and inclusive? It is infrastructure and services that a city offers to its residents, right? How do we make these more gender friendly? So if we look at, for example, if women need to be out, one of the big issues for women in terms of safety is the lack of safety or fear after a city gets dark. So the nature of the city changes once it gets dark. So in the daytime, there is a lot more freedom to move around. And the moment the city gets dark, if you even look at the cities that we are living in now, Delhi, it is a very male-dominated space after dark. So how do we get more women to be part of city life? Now, this has to be done from women need to be at the table when cities are being designed and planned, when services are being designed. So when we want to plan, where markets should be, how should parks be more friendly? What kind of public transport is needed? What are the kinds of services that women need? Especially women, say young mothers, when they go out with children. since women do a lot of the work of care. Public toilets, that's another big issue, right? Because in most of our cities in India, we find there's a severe lack of public toilets. And I'll give you one example of how this impacts gender exclusion or inclusion in cities. A lot of bus drivers, when in Delhi, we tried to get women to become bus drivers and bus conductors. Initially, it was found that even in the bus depots, there was no women's toilet. There were only men's toilets. Now, if you have to go out in the city, you need toilets. I mean, if a woman needs to be a street vendor who's working in the city, working from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. at night, she needs a place where she can go, go to the toilet, maybe put her feet up, rest in between. If her child is nearby, maybe somewhere where she can feed her child. So, I think there are many elements to it, and I'm really bringing the work of care centrally to say that, a city that is not designed for women doesn't visibilize the work of care. It presumes the work of care happens somehow, and unless we make it saying this is part of a city, because care is part of a city. Children need to be looked after. Elderly people need to be looked after, right? Cooking needs to be done. So if you design a city for these diverse uses, you will design a public transport system that is more flexible. So, you'll not have, say, if 6 o'clock in the morning is when a lot of factory workers and domestic workers go, maybe we need to have a little more public transport at the time. Certain kinds of public transport, right? So I think, to me, it is getting a diverse set of people at the table. It is looking at services in a way and infrastructure in a way that makes it more inclusive. So, it is very concrete. It's not something in the air when we say gender-friendly city. There are very clear indicators and variables that we can begin to measure to say, how do you make a city gender-friendly?
That's quite good things that you've brought out, because there are quite a lot of things that now I also get to understand, whether it's something on that terms of safety, in terms of after that, about how inclusion can come into picture. And coming on those lines ahead, how is it possible to quantify on each city scale that this is how safe it is and this is how inclusive it is, and move forward? Or it is still very difficult to quantify that? Because my assumption is also that while some of the things can be thought of, that okay, these basic services are taken care of, but the implementation of the same needs to be much more contextualized to each city somewhere. And what all things are possible to make sure that this can be more standardized across each city?
No, absolutely. And I think, at Safety Pin, our aim so far has been to bring some kind of parameters which can be used to, measure cities. Recognizing that everything cannot be quantified, but you can have a set of parameters. For example, we do have livability indices, the Economics Out of Safe City Index. So, there are ways that we can begin to measure. So, one of the things is the safety audit. Now, a safety audit measures the nature of the public space. So, it looks at how the public infrastructure is inclusive or safe. So, it measures things like, the infrastructure such as lighting, the walkability, but it also looks at the social usage of the space. So are there eyes on the street? Is it a deserted space? Is it an active street? Are there, people who use the street for street vending, for sitting in a cafe, for a tea stall, etc.? Or is it a deserted street? And it's very important to measure both. Because I'll give an example. If you look at Lutyens Delhi, it's got very good infrastructure, but I wouldn't be caught dead walking there in the evening, because there is absolutely not a soul who occupies that street except the security guard, whose only interest is to safeguard the big homes inside. So unless a street is active, right, you walk on in Chandni Chowk, if I walk even in Rajpat Nagar, yeah, the street is alive, and it may be crowded. I may have to bump into people, but I would feel safer in a space where there is activity. So one part of it that we have uh, found a way to measure and assess is the safety audit, right? So that is a way of looking at public spaces to say what kind of amenities and what kind of infrastructure is necessary. Now, in addition to that, there are a few other elements that can be measured. The second one is services, and in services, I would put things like public transport, right, and even public toilets. So that's another whole set of things. Then there's a third arena which we can look at a little bit, which is on security. Now, the presence of policing, the kind of policing that is done, right? And then I think we can measure also the gender friendliness of urban policies, of master plans. Is there an element while planning the city, while devising policies, there is a recognition that this has to be done? So if you divide, if you look at these four broad arenas, policies, physical infrastructure, social usage, and services, under these we can come up with a series of indicators, which is what the kind of work we've been doing, and then give some kind of you can measure it, you can see, you can give a score to it. So, for example, the safety audit itself, we do give a score, but you also identify what is missing, and therefore you're able to then provide recommendations or, work with municipal governments or others to fix those. So the idea is, to me, any index, the value of the index is not just in the score, but if it unpacks the score and tells you how can you better yourself, right? It's not just, oh, this is number 1 and that is number 10. That's a nice newspaper article, but that doesn't really change the world for people. And so what the kind of work we are trying to do is really say, how do you unpack that score? How unpack those indicators? So lighting may be good in these areas, but the walk path it's so unwalkable, the street, that people end up walking on the road, and they face the danger of both road accidents as well as feeling fearful or whatever. So there's a range of kind of things we can unpack. Policies are gender transport is planned, is gender blind. The security and policing structure is not such that the hotspots are being policed well at night. So, I do believe, and that's the work that we've been doing, is to try and unpack those indicators so that it doesn't seem, it's not something so abstract, oh, we can never make cities safer with it. That's not true. You can do some things, and you can do quite a few things if you are intentional about your planning, intentional about your implementation, intentional about the way you feel people can move about cities. So to answer your question, we really do need to make those indicators, which many of us are working on, not just in India but globally. But then socialize those indicators, get city governments and municipal governments to bring them into their ambit, to begin to report on it. So, for example, the SDGs already have some indications, whether it's SDG 11, whether it's SDG 5, on some of the targets. Now, if we begin to unpack them a little bit more and come up with very clear indicators, that will help, I think, cities become more inclusive, friendly, accessible, cities for everyone.
Absolutely, that's true. And I like the whole concept of safety audit and having a progressive level, because I feel somewhere it's important to handhold cities through the process that, okay, how can we improve on that score? And that is something that we also do with climate smart cities. Because it's not that they are going to know something right away that, okay, we are bad here, but how can we improve is, I think, something which helps them understand it in a better way, more implementable actions as well, instead of just shooting in the dark. And so I do have, like, I want to unpack it much more. And first, I would like to take up the technology side of it. So is it more on the lines of, so one part is on the lines that for this whole audit, are there any technological help do we take for this to do the whole process? And the second is on the lines of, uh, are there any solutions which help facilitate better safety in the city? And how does that help? And to what extent? Because I don't think so. Some of the like eyes on the street, we can have cameras, but I'm not sure if it will be as effective as either physical eyes on the street. So how effective are those as well? Something on those lines would also be quite helpful.
But technology is an enabler. And we must recognize that. Technology in itself may not be the answer unless you look at technology as an enabler for social equity, for better cities, whatever it is you want, right? To answer your second question in a sense, to say, for example, the CCTV camera. Now, the thing is that, you're absolutely right. When I say eyes on the street, it's not the camera. Because the camera doesn't make you feel safe. The camera is a tool to aid police in maybe after a crime has been committed. Honestly, globally, that's what we are seeing, right? So increasing the number of CCTV cameras, and it's being seen as a quick fix solution. For example, Delhi is proudly proclaiming that they have the most CCTV cameras in the country, or I don't know what. Now, to me, that is, it's a technological fix which is not recognizing the human angle. Who said that CCTV cameras make cities safe? From whose perspective does it make it safer? So unless we ask these questions, the technology is not going to be an aid. It's not going to help us. It just stands on its own. Now, on the safety audit perspective and the technology that we have developed, the Safety Pin app, which is a way for the crowd, for public, for citizens and residents of a city to give their input about the city. So it's an app for crowdsourcing data. So you can download the app and do a safety audit in the city. And the safety audit has 8 parameters, which includes things like lighting, walkability, how close is public transport, eyes on the street, but not as security, but eyes on the street as the urban design principle is who can see you when you're on the street. Are there high boundary walls? Like many of our cities have very high boundary walls, setbacks, which actually prevent the street from being an active space. So the safety audit measures these 8 parameters, including public transport and security. And then it also asks, do you feel safe in this area? There's a lot of things about safety that should be the perception. I just feel unsafe here. It's not that there's necessarily been a crime, but I feel unsafe. So the safety audit is a tool that in our app, we've tried to make it a crowdsource tool where we get people to share what they feel. And that data is available on the app. So you can see what other people have said. And based on that, safety score is given and other elements are there. So technology, of course, we are also, building it, constantly improving it. I'm not saying we have the final answer or something, but at Safety Pin, one of the things we've tried to do over the past 8 years is really to say how can technology be used to make cities more friendly, gender friendly, and safe, but in a way that truly reflects the needs of people. So it's really a bottom-up tool, not just a top-down tool where, someone says that this technology will help with that, facial recognition, this, that. There's a lot of technology. It's very important to look at how does it actually reflect people's voices. And so I do believe technology can make a difference. I do believe technology can be an enabler. But the makers of the technology, the designers of the technology must recognize that there is diversity in the users of the technology also. And I think that is where sometimes, there is a constant need to keep pushing the boundaries, We see today there's a whole notion of the algorithmic bias. When machine learning looks at images, It's doing things like, not being able to identify properly. So that becomes a problem. So how do we address even that? So, I think we have to engage with technology. I don't think there is a choice. I don't think it's wise to not engage with technology. And I think that's important to do, to make technology more and more available. And I just want to give you a very small example where we did a project with a set of young women in a low-income neighborhood in Delhi, where many of them did not own smartphones themselves. But what we did is we just, gave one or two smartphones that they could use to map their public spaces using both safety pins, but also just images and just share their feelings and on this thing. And we found that, they were able to use it in a way that really impacted their lives. They were able to point out which parts of their community they felt unsafe and excluded, and how it could be improved. And that, for example, one thing they came up with is in the evening, we can't go for tuition classes because the street is not safe. And so then that data was used to both improve the lighting as well as put a kind of a police picket between 6 and 9 at night. Now, it was very significant because once girls can also go for tuition, they are then at least equally placed when they're, going in for the competitive exams, stuff like that. So the thing is, once you begin to see the human kind of element of technology and the impact of these, I think you can design much, much more gender-friendly technologies, much more inclusive ways of doing it. So, it's important. It needs to be done. It's an enabler, but it's not a magic bullet. I think that's what I would say.
No, absolutely. I do agree. And somewhere I do agree that those biases are something which really needs to be looked into, because algorithmic biases are no jokes when people are trying to develop systems which will not require a lot of human intervention. And at certain point in time, that might create much more problems than the help that is supposed to do. And so coming again to where you had said that, okay, these are the different parameters of safety audits and the progressive levels of the safety. If you can also help us understand how municipal corporations can take this up as a service for its own betterment of the society. And somewhere on the line, I'm also assuming if you can give us a couple of examples on some of the best practices that have been done, maybe in India preferably, or around the world as well, to be able to inculcate this whole process.
Absolutely. I mean, the buck stops with the city government and the municipal corporation, right? At that level, we can do the analysis, we can do everything, but the changes that have to be done on the ground have to be done by the government. Like, I can't install a street light. I can't fix a broken pavement, right? I can't install a public toilet. These have to be done by the municipal corporation. So I think, what needs to be done and what is that it has to be a co-created collaborative process right from the start. I think even the data collection, even the diagnosis, even the analysis must be done as a joint exercise. So cities and municipal corporations should be involved. They should also share what are their challenges, what are their problems that they face. Community level meetings can take place, technologies can be used, safety audits can be done, focus groups, ways of, doing the diagnosis on these different levels of the indicators, right? Which I said, I've given you 4 broad areas, right? So policy, infrastructure, social infrastructure, as well as services. So once we do the diagnosis in a collaborative way, where you involve young people, you involve even the voices of older people. For example, today we know that our cities are also graying. So how do we make sure that older people's needs are also taken into consideration? So you do a kind of a diagnosis, which is a collective diagnosis, and the municipal corporation is involved in that. So there is a conversation taking place. So it's not something that Somebody is doing something somewhere else, giving some data, the municipal corporation is unable to understand, unwilling to engage with it, because often municipal corporations do not want to change business as usual. It's more work sometimes to do things differently. So I think that conversations need to, say what is in it for me. Right? At the end of the day, what is in it for the community? What is in it for the say the business who is a partner, what is in it for an academic institution, what is in it for an NGO, what is in it for a citizens group, for the municipality, right? So unless we're able to create that kind of ecosystem where there is the recognition that the change will improve things, it's not going to, it's not really going to happen, honestly. Because then it will be piecemeal, okay, take care, we will fix one light here. But that's not enough, right? We need to do a lot more. So I think that's an important one. And I'd like to give one example of the work we've been doing in Delhi, which to me has been at least a couple of steps which are positive. So the data we collected, both using different methodologies, I don't want to get into that right now, was we were able to actually map the entire city in terms of all these physical and social infrastructure. And one of the things that came out was the issue of lighting and the dark spots in the city. And when the Delhi government, when we worked with them, they recognized that this actually has a great impact on many people's mobility, not just women, but certainly women. And so what they did was they brought together all the stakeholders who work on lighting. Now, this is also important, right? Because in a city like Delhi, there are some 15 stakeholders who improve lighting. There are the 3 MCDs, there's the PWD, there's a national highway, there is this or that. So when you go individually, you go and say, this light is not working, they'll say, this is not our light, this is the national highway. But what they did was actually under the power secretary, they brought all the stakeholders. So right then and there, if someone said, this is not my jurisdiction, you could then have that conversation. So in fact, the lighting in our initial mapping, we found there were nearly over 7,000 points which were poorly lit. And after this exercise and improvement of the lighting, it came down to like less than 2,000. So, I think if there is a conversation, if data speaks clearly, if the municipal corporation is brought on board, if they see how it will impact them, there is a way that it can be done. And I think that becomes an improvement. Then when we did that, then we also went back to them and they were looking at this whole issue of last mile connectivity. Because lighting is one part, but the metro is safe. But when a woman gets off the metro, what happens after that? How do you feel walk home safely? So we did a kind of analysis of maybe 20 metro stations in the city to say, what is the problem at the metro station? How do you organize last mile transit? How do you make the area have be a lively public space? So when I get out of a metro station at 9:30 at night, if there's lighting, if there are little shops, if there are vendors, if there are people, if there is a good there's a police desk, if I can get into an e-rickshaw comfortably, all this makes the journey safer, right? So this is something again we were able to work with. So similarly, many cities have done interesting kind of things. So one project we had done actually in Hanoi, which is a city in Vietnam, where while they were building the metro track, they got people to work with a youth group to actually audit where the new metro stations were going to come out, so that even before the metro stations were built, last mile connectivity and accessibility addressed, because there were a lot of universities and other things along that metro line. So I think there are ways. For example, a lot of work is being done in many Indian cities around improving NMT infrastructure, cycling, improving the walk path, making it more walkable. Because our data is showing that women walk to work. A lot of women either walk or use public transport, because really if there's one car or one motorcycle in a family, it's likely the male will use it. So if you're looking at expanding access, you look at the public transport well, so even like the city I live in, Gurgaon, it's unusual, because there was very little public transport initially, actually lots of domestic workers cycle. Now this is not a common sight, say even in Delhi. But if you come to Gurgaon, you find hundreds of domestic workers bicycling to work and back in the early morning, the early evening. You can improve, bicycle infrastructure for them. So I think there are many ways that municipal corporations, city governments, other actors, transport authorities, when they listen to the diverse voices, when they listen to what the data is saying, what they can design can actually be it can be very fruitful for them as well, Like we do want more people, they want more people to use public transport, right? We do want this thing. So if you design public transport in a way that is responsive to needs, more people will use it. Right? So I think there is a synergistic way that we can look at this. If we realize that there is an ecosystem and we start engaging different partners of that ecosystem. And I don't think we should include businesses, we should include the non-profit, we should include academics, we should include citizens groups, resident associations. I think today a lot of work globally is recognizing that city building is a collective exercise. It's not a top-down exercise of the municipal corporation doing something, right? So I think that's the big step that we are taking, hopefully.
I do agree. It's a very complex science in its own somewhere, because there is no one right answer to any of the problems or challenges that we are talking about as well. And some of the solutions can actually help develop, give multiple answers, like just increasing NMP and developing such a space will have a benefit of not only creating a safer space, but also just improving on the reducing the amount of vehicular traffic, which in turn kind of somewhere comes back to climate change. So I do believe that it's a complicated system that yes, one solution can give you multiple answers, but at the same time, one question can also be there, which will have to be facilitated at the bottom of the pyramid over there. And thank you so much. This is quite interesting, and this is one of the last questions that we ask everyone, which is on the lines of different skill sets. And I'm looking at it from both hardcore and soft skills. That what are the different skill sets required to develop this kind of field to be more prominent in its own action format, so that more and more people can work towards it to develop something on these lines.
So as I said, I think that it is the understanding that actually our cities are a collaborative space. So I think that is a big one. So to get really a diverse set of voices at the table to begin when design, plan, services, infrastructure, the range of things. I think that's a big one we need to. But certainly infrastructure itself needs to be strengthened and bolstered. And I think the point that you made to me is a very important point, which over the years I have come to, that a lot of these problems are pointing to a similar solution. So whether it's actually decarbonizing or safety, and I'll explain to you, because over the years what we found is that if you make a city safe, it is a walkable city. And if you make a city walkable, it's a safe city. Now this is an interesting correlation, right? So if you make a city walkable, it's actually safe. Now when you make a city more walkable and you make it more safe, you can begin to, address the decarbonizing agenda as well, and therefore work towards decongesting our cities, right? And then you start planning cities. This COVID pandemic has brought up ideas of having, more, whatever, 10-minute, 15-minute city. We cannot do it maybe in the same way they do in the Western thing, but we can. Like, for example, neighborhoods which actually have the key amenities at walking, cycling, cycle rickshaw, etc. I think, for me, the cycle rickshaw is something we should not get rid of. It's actually a very it's a very good mode of transport. So in so many ways, it's something we should promote. Sustainability, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges facing us today. There's no doubt about it. Look at our cities; they are a mess. Most of them are a mess, and I think it's an urgent that we have to fix that. I don't think we have any time left to do it. And I think once we see the connections between all of it, if you make a city child friendly, if a child can walk to school, you have done such a big, I think, big step towards sustainability, towards safety, towards so many things that, we can begin to talk about sustainable, future-looking cities that are, carbon-friendly, decarbonized, the whole range of issues, and inclusive. So I think, to me, some of the key words that we need to look at is actually inclusion. And if we are building cities that are truly inclusive, I think we will begin to address a lot of the other elements. And that inclusion it has both a hard infrastructure element to it as well as a soft part of it, which is really listening to the diversity of voices. And I think some of our cities are going in that direction. There is evidence that, a recognition that this is something that needs to be done, and I think, so it's not like a smart city is not just putting in the infrastructure or the technology. The smart city is when that infrastructure is actually responding to the needs of the people of that city. And I think that, that is the journey that we Indian cities need to take actually to become livable, to become, truly livable and truly places that we, thrive. Cities are beautiful places, I love, because it provides so much to us. And I think we should treasure it, and we should actually preserve it, treasure it, make them sustainable, make them more meaningful for the people who live in it.
Absolutely, I do agree about the same. It's all it all comes down together. It's not just the one thing that is pointed out. Solutions are just a few of them, if done properly, can have impact on several range of issues, which are key for us to also grow in a better way. And thank you so much. If I have missed out on any specific things and you would like to cover it up, I think we can do that now.
I think I've said, I was able to end with my love for cities. So that's, I think it's something we don't recognize, most of us actually love cities also, and therefore we should build cities which are lovable. Truly, yeah.
I absolutely agree. It's very important to enjoy where you live somewhere. Otherwise, it becomes a problem of living there in itself. So if that's not possible, there is something that needs to be done about this. Thank you so much for your time. This was surely a very interesting conversation. And we hope to see that more and more cities bring up these perspectives to make it as safer as possible, including the inclusion parameters of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning into the podcast. Do subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform and follow us on all social media channels. For more details about the Climate Center for Cities and registration on Climate Practitioners India Network, click on the link in the show notes. The episode is conceptualized and produced by Punit Gandhi. A big thank you to the whole team at C-Cube and NIUA for supporting the development of the podcast. Stay tuned for the next episode.